And we're live. With no one in the room. I beat you all here. For those of you who are watching this later, as all of you will be by definition, I've tried to get live today, and this is the fourth time. The first three times I got the spinning wheel of death. So now people are checking in. And yes, sir, you are the first. Hello. Thank you. We had a lot of people in the room last time and I had to bail. And I always feel so bad doing that. But I, unfortunately had to do that. So Nemo, hey, Steve. Hey, Nemo. Aylin Kara, it's working. Yeah, don't jinx me, okay? Don't jinx me. Wasn't in the face. Hello, Steve. I am here. Toby Kenobi, yeah, finally. David Twig, hey, Steve. Dixie Champagne, hallelujah, from Mountain Park, Georgia. Peter Mendix, yay. You have no idea how annoying it is when I've said before, one of the theories I have in life is if you get something working, you leave it. Don't mess with success, right? And so I have the setup in the studio. The only thing I do is I occasionally change the background behind me by adding stuff. But I never touch the microphone. I never unplug the camera. I never move the laptop. This laptop hasn't moved in months. And so when I come in here and plug it all in and it doesn't work, something's out of kilter. So there you go. Joe Mercado, hey, from San Diego. Thank you. JP, back from the dead, 13 pounds lighter in 7 days. Pain and painkillers are a biatch. And JP, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but he's complained lately of having some issues, medical issues, which happens to people as they age, sadly. Fred Stewart, it's working. Yeah. Sergeant Graham Bowe, don't fix what's not broken. Yeah, that's the temptation. People always say, yeah, you can tweak this, you can tweak it. I'm like, dude, I ain't tweaking nothing. Linda Cubberly, hey, Steve from Southern California. Where in SoCal? I went to law school in Los Angeles. I like to check in with the peeps, especially up and down the beaches. Manhattan Beach, for instance. Kevin in New York is here. 90 knots, hello again. Betty Boop, did you re-hide the $100 bill? Probably, since the last time. I forgot to move it a couple of videos, and I apologize for that. Well, Bill 57, thanks for your determination. Hey, I was starting to get annoyed. Chad Smalley, clean the dust. That's one thing I should do more often, and I don't, but there's stuff back there that's very dusty, so I apologize. Brian Taylor from Grand Prairie, Alberta, Canada. Been following you for over a year and really don't know how I stumbled upon your channel, but I keep coming back. That's the thing, right? No, the point is, I have a lot of people say, Steve, you're a guy who talks about lemon law and cars and the law, but I'm not interested in those things, but I still enjoy the videos. And I appreciate that. But, I like to think that I'm just here talking about stuff. And if I'm the kind of guy you could talk to in real life, well, hey, that's why I'm here. So Richard R. checking in from Minneapolis. Thank you for checking in. And Mark Lozeman from the glorious kingdom of the Netherlands. Wow, thank you. I like when people check in from other continents, as I like to say. Dixie Champagne, if it ain't broke, by all means, fix it until it is. Ram 50 V8, hi, Steve, 74 and raining now in Harrison, Arkansas. And I'll tell you right now, we got beautiful weather here in Michigan. It's 68 degrees with light, fluffy clouds, and in the weather, that the heat spell we had there is finally broken, which is nice. It was hot. DePaul 31, 75F, sunny and breezy in New York City. Richard R. has spotted the hundo. Don't want to give that away. Scott Argyle, I'm near Driftwood Beach, Oregon. That sounds so nice. Driftwood Beach. JP, what's the picture of behind the newish tassel for the sword? Someone sent this in to me a couple months ago, and it's a guy named Thurston who was a magician who would go places, and part of his act was he was good at card throwing. And so he actually had his own cards made, and someone sent that to me, and they told me the story, and I mentioned it in a video a while back, so I appreciate that. I got to set it just right so the glare doesn't hit the camera wrong. And by the way, I got this license plate right here. That is a leather license plate in the old school style. And I don't normally plug businesses. This is not a paid commercial. This is just me telling you that a guy sent me that, and it's cool. Because long before they had the metal license plates like these over here, they actually had leather license plates. And at one point in time, you were supposed to actually make your own plate. You'd go to the state of Michigan and say, hey, I want a license. And they go, okay, you're number 148. And you had to make a plate that said 148. So there were people who made leather plates and they would just hang the 148 on it or whatever. So this guy, Steve Hammett, who's in Washington, the state of, sent me that leather license plate in the style of a Michigan leather license plate from back in the day. Now, they didn't have vanity plates back then, but that's the style. But if you have an old car from the pre-metal license plate era, which I think he says around 1915, 1916 and earlier, you can order a plate from him that'll be as authentic looking as anything else you can get. So I know Jay Leno's gotten a bunch of plates from him. And if you see any of Jay's, pre-World War I cars, some of them will have leather plates made by Steve Hammett at leatherplates.com, leatherplates.com. So again, I'm not advertising for the guy. I'm not shilling for the guy. I'm just telling you, it's a cool product. They're very, very cool. I put it on the set and immediately people go, oh my God, that's cool. And it's leather about that thick. It is really, really nice. So Canadian Robot Lady just checked in and said, as Johnny Knoxville is not here, it's 68 and Bad Axe. It's good that someone checks into the weather from Bad Axe from time to time. Oh, boy. JP says they still make their own plates in the UK, but most people just get them made at the local car repair shop. Okay. Madam Lestrange, Steve, yeah, greetings from the Mad Madam of Massachusetts. Thank you for checking in. Bill Taylor, my dad was a firefighter, and his helmet engine company shield was made of that thick leather. You are that now that you mention that, that's the other place you see stuff made out of thick leather. Was old badges and insignias and so on for law enforcement and firefighters. And I've seen that before also. These were helmets that were made out of leather, just pressed leather that was shaped like that because leather, although it's not as good as the stuff we have nowadays in terms of shielding your head, it's pretty good for, stuff falling on your head. It's better than nothing, certainly. Rafe Garrett says, hey, maybe the Canadian Robot Lady could be on a split screen. We've actually talked about that. And one of these days, I will talk to her about that, and we'll have to figure out how to set it up. I know that technically it's possible. It's going to take setting up some equipment at her end, and then us mashing something together in the hyperspace of the internet. We'll get it done. We'll get it done. Mr. Phil 1969, what were you looking up in the dictionary you didn't put back right? I moved the dictionaries the other day, and I forgot what word I was looking up. Oh, it was stumm. It was the Yiddish word being quiet. And the sad part is that if I move the dictionaries, they flop around. I need to get some space holders in there. So Kevin in New York, old football helmets were also made of leather. That is correct. I remember that. There was, in fact, I think a George Clooney movie involving leather helmets, weren't there? Oh, boy. Canadian Robot Lady is volunteering to be my Canadian correspondent. I like that. Although I think at this point you're beyond being a correspondent. I think at this point you'd be a co-host of some sort. And I think we've talked about this before. I worked in radio, as did the Canadian Robot Lady, but she worked in Canada. I worked in the U.S. So we've both, I think, participated in morning shows where there was a team of people bantering, as we say. Betty Boop, have you finally got out camping and canoeing yet? No, sadly. Too busy. In fact, I keep saying I need to get my Viper out and shoot another video because I've had people ask me about that. I did some work on the Viper. I had the seat lowered a couple inches. Have not shot any video with my new comfortable seat, so I will do that probably this week coming up. There are only two genders. What are your opinions on loser pay laws? I like them in most cases. I think that if you successfully sue and you're forced to, I think the court should have discretion to make the loser pay and kind of like, why'd you force them to sue you? So Ella Cram points out that even buckets were made of leather. Yeah, buckets were made of leather. Buckets were made of wood. You got to work with what you have. So Daniel Kester, I missed the glass bottle. There ain't nothing better than an ice cold Coca-Cola in a glass bottle. When you have the glass in ice, and you get it nice and cold, and you pull it out. You can hear the rattle of the ice cubes. You pop that cap off. You're drinking Coke from glass bottles. Like I said, nothing better than that. So Canadian Robot Lady confirms she did, in fact, work on a morning show. Jay Richards said, who is Canadian Robot Lady? Well, Canadian Robot Lady is the woman who voices the intro and outros, or extras, as they call them in Canada, to my show. The sultry voice at the beginning. This is welcome once again to Leto's Law. Here's Steve Leto. She says it better than I can. So, Rafe Garrett says, what is her real name? I'm beginning to feel uncomfortable calling her Robot Lady. Well, you can call her Mrs. Canadian Robot Lady or Miss Canadian Robot Lady if that makes you feel better. Oh, boy. Donald Whittemore says, I am so old, my diapers were made of leather. Yeah, but it beats having them made of wood. Tim Denhart, are all the warning stickers inside the Viper a standard thing in the U.S.? There aren't that many warning stickers. There's a warning sticker saying, be careful putting your leg over where the side pipes are. My Viper has the tailpipes come out the back, but the side pipes and the catalytic converters come out right by the rocker panels. And there is a warning there to keep your legs clear of that because it is hot. It's not so hot as to hurt you, but it's warm. Then there's also another warning that says about how you can shut the airbag off using the key on the passenger side. That's old school. And it basically just tells you that, this is how you do it and don't leave the key there. But I mean, who's going to drive the car with the key in the airbag on-off switch? So not that bad. I've seen more uglier, dumber warning stickers on cars, such as the ones that tell you when you turn down your visor that in a older Ford Explorer about how you shouldn't go around corners too fast. So, there are only two genders. It must feel weird to have the seatbelt in the wrong direction. Oh, absolutely, it does. It does. And I still reach the wrong way, and it's confusing because I have two Explorers that are the correct way, and my Viper goes the other way. And it's kind of funny because I'll get out of my Viper and get into my Explorer, and I'll reach for the seatbelt the wrong direction, and then I'll occasionally reach for the clutch. Drain the Swamp 2.0. Hello from Howell, Michigan. Hello from Howell, Michigan. Thank you very much. Howell, Michigan's home of WHMI Whammy Radio, above 93 FM. I've had friends who worked there. I never worked there myself, but a very cool small-town radio station. Howell, of course, is a little about past Brighton, from those of you traveling from the Detroit area. So Bob Blah Blah points out that the Canadian Robot Lady occasionally does answering machine greetings. She's actually done some for some professional organizations, she tells me. So have you ever filed a lemon law claim against Tesla? I have not. Attorneys I know have, but Tesla still has such a very, very small market share. I wouldn't find that surprising. So Bill Taylor, Bronco 2 warning sticker, don't drive this like a car. They should also have one that says this side up. But I know guys who worked at Ford Motor Company, and they actually had a whole floor of one building devoted to Bronco 2 rollover defense. And friend of mine told me that one day he came into work and a guy came in laughing. He goes, yeah, I just saw Bronco in an accident and it didn't flip. And they're all laughing like, what? How's that possible? So Chris Chaos says he had a beach towel years ago. Warning label said, do not use for hurricane shelter. Daniel Kester, my real life brother, is watching the live stream and doesn't know about the hundo, or the Hyundai, as some people say. Well, there's a $100 bill behind me on the set, which moves from video to video most of the time. And I have to apologize to the guys who are hardcore who catch it when I don't move it. Almost always moves. And it's simply part of an old joke / bet I've got that no one can show me a Supreme Court case saying you don't need a driver's license. Net27, what do you need to do if you would like to work as a radio talk host? Go back about 20 years when the market was better. No, if you wanted to become a talk show host, the key is two things. You need to be good at it, and you need to have something to talk about. And then once you've conquered those two things, which, by the way, are not that easy to do, you need to convince somebody who has a radio station that you could do it on the air. Unfortunately, most radio stations do not hire talk hosts anymore. They simply get the syndicated stuff, or They let hosts come in and buy time. That's why you hear so much bad radio on the weekends in major markets. They're selling the weekend slots off to anybody who wants them, realtors, lawyers, financial advisors, and so on. And so most of that stuff's horrible. But once in a while, you hear some guy in a local small town who's on the radio talking, having a good old time, and he's good. But to get a job in radio these days is extremely difficult. I've had some people ask me if I wanted to take what I'm doing right here and move it onto the radio. And I've actually toyed with the idea, but the problem is that any place you do this, you are limited to that geographical region unless you open it up and do it what I'm doing right here, in which case, why do I need a radio station? So that's how you do it. David Ward checking in from OKC. Thank you there. Canadian Robot Lady says, yeah, you can also take training. And yeah, there are classes you can take. There's schools that offer it. I've mentioned before that there's a Specs Howard School of Broadcast Arts. They might have a different name for the school now, but it's called Specs Howard. And it's been in Michigan, the Detroit area, for decades. And they will teach you the ins and outs of everything you need to know about how to be on the radio, be on television, video production, audio production, and all that stuff. And when you get out, you will have all the technical proficiency necessary. But again, that doesn't mean that you still have something to talk about. That's the point. And it's kind of like if you have a camera, doesn't make you a photographer. You've got to learn how to use it and then find things to take pictures of that other people will enjoy. So we all know the people who've gotten a camera, started taking pictures, they show you all the pictures they took, and you're like, so what? You know, so there's a big leap there. So Steve Staylock, I don't need a driver's license to drive. The car still starts and goes down the road. Yeah, but you need one to drive illegally. So the Fuse Man points out there could be the Les Nessman School of News Reporting. Hey, Matthias F. Lou, many greetings from Berlin, Germany. Thank you for checking in, my friend. I appreciate that. And I will have to tell you that right now I'm reading a book written by a German. I'm reading a book called Battleship Bismarck, and I'm rereading it. I've read it before, but it's a book written by the highest ranking survivor of the Bismarck. And the Bismarck famously only was at sea for about 8 or 9 days, depending on where you count its launch. And the guy who wrote the book was a high-ranking officer who survived. And he wrote the book in later years, and it's absolutely fascinating to read that kind of in-close detail of an event that you've heard of before from somebody who was there. And it's a very, very good book. And I believe it's actually very well written, but also very, very accurate. So Matthias checking from Germany. Thank you very much. Laura Tambo, hello, Steve from Marin County, California. Did you get any flack for your girlfriend in a coma reference? No, I got no flack for it, but I did get only 1 or 2 people who recognized it. And that's what worries me. But there's a band called the Smiths from England, and they had a song called Girlfriend in a Coma. And I mentioned, I forget it was girlfriends or comas. And I said, I've got a girlfriend in a coma. And 2 or 3 people said, the Smiths. And everyone else is kind of like, what's he talking about now? FD, who's got a name I cannot pronounce without treading too close to the line, says, hello, Steve, my favorite legal eagle. Awesome videos. Well, thank you. Thank you for checking in. And Dixie Champagne is now speaking German. We're breaking into speaking in tongues in the live chat. There you go. Gregory Parsons, hello from Oregon. What about the new Detroit-made Jeep brand Wagoneer with a Detroit map on the top of the roof? I've not seen that. I'm familiar with the new Ford Bronco, I can tell you that, but I'm not familiar. I'll have to check that out. Peter Mandix has watched Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry. The Charger is sublime, not a true yellow. So which color was yours? Well, mine was yellow, but it depends on the settings of your device. But the car in Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry is a weird color. It is not a standard Dodge color of that year. It's not. And it's not green either. It's yellowish, greenish. It depends on the tint of your device. But LD Baranti, what's that on your shirt? The shirt is Copper Harbor, Michigan, and it's the fire and rescue people from Copper Harbor. Copper Harbor is at the tip of the Keweenaw Peninsula, at the northern end of the Upper Peninsula, which is the furthest north point on land, not counting Isle Royal or any islands out in Lake Superior, but the furthest point in Michigan that you can drive to. Let's put it that way. Furthest north point you can drive to. And I got friends up there, and a friend of mine is up there on, working with these guys, and they sell these shirts as fundraisers. I actually bought 2. So, Tigerman 99515 says there's a YouTube video where a guy went to a lot of the locations from Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry. Somebody else told me that was actually shot in some section of California, and I was unaware of that. I never looked that up. IMDb's got a lot of information like that. I should check that out. Julia or Julio Michelle says, hey, Steve, I sold my car a while back, and I'm not sure whether or not the car was transferred out of my name. What can I do after the fact to cover myself? That's a problem. Because in the old days, I'm talking about pre-COVID, if you bought my car, I would insist that the two of us go to the Secretary of State's office in Michigan, and I'd sign the title to you and watch you apply for a title in your name in front of an employee, and they would issue the new title to you, and I'd walk out of there a free man. And I know people who've sold cars and handed the signed title over to somebody, hoping that that's what happens, but it doesn't always happen. And the biggest problem you have is that people get lazy, and they're driving around the car, and they never bothered to retitle it. And Michigan made it worse because they actually told people you're allowed to drive a car without the proper registration so long as you do it within so many days of purchase, blah, 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 blah. So now people go, hey, I'm legally allowed to drive the car without registering it. And so they wait that period of time. And I got an email from somebody recently who told me that they sold a vehicle and it turned up a couple of years later, and the police called and said, hey, your car's down here doing something bad. People are like, I sold the car 2 years ago. Well, you know something? You think you did, but did you? And this is one of the confusing things about the law, is that when you hand them the title and the keys and the car, possession, and they hand you the money, technically speaking, the car is theirs. But to the people who matter, such as the Secretary of State's office or the state police, when they run the search, if your name comes back, they think you're the owner. And you might straighten that out later, but who wants that nightmare? And I did videos about this. I've done stories about this for Jalopnik, where felt like I was just ranting till I was blue in the face, and people are going, oh, you're a worrywart. You don't know what you're talking about. That never happens. And invariably, I get emails from people who go, Steve, it happened. It happened. So what I would do if I were you is I'd try to follow up with the buyer and go, by the way, did you get that thing retitled yet? Did you get it registered yet? Call your insurance company, go, I sold the car. Some states, as JP points out, do allow you to send a notice of sale to the DMV, but not all states allow that. Not all states care. So I can tell you that in, I know one of the West Coast states, it might be California, but I do know that in Florida, for instance, when you sell a car, there's a tear-off strip at one edge of the title, and you can fill it out, and you can mail it to the state saying, I sold this car. But you mail that in, and the other person never titles the car. Well, I've never heard of this, but I have to imagine it's possible where someone's going to go, you filled that out and then sold the car to some idiot without, or something. There's going to be a problem there. So whatever. Tiger Stripes, hey, Steve, hail, chat. Thank you. Thank you for checking in. J.H. Nielsen says, what if you reported the car as stolen? Well, the car's not stolen. You sold it. See, it's a gray area. There's a gray area. Oh, boy. Cyberdoxes take the plates off and return them to DMV. Oh, yes. What blows my mind is the states that have you sell the car with the plate on it. That, to me, is insanity. Okay, so in Michigan, when you sell the car, you keep the plates. And I believe JP told me some states actually require you to turn the plates in if you don't put them on another car. But in Michigan, they just say remove the plates. But you might have your plate. But doesn't mean that someone else doesn't have the car. Matthias says, hello, if you search Bismarck versus a Hood, you will see a short film about the battle. Oh, I've seen the films. I've seen the films. I've watched the movies. I've seen documentaries. I've read the books. I've actually read books written by people now on both sides. If those of you don't know what we're talking about, the Bismarck was one of the two big battleships that Germany launched in World War II. The other was the Tirpitz. Tirpitz is a slightly larger ship, but they're considered sister ships. Although the captain of the Bismarck insisted on calling it a he instead of a she. Another story altogether. And the Bismarck sailed and was only at sea for 8 days before it got sunk. But before it got sunk, it sank the Hood, which was a battle cruiser, I believe, not a full-scale battleship. So there was a lot of tragedy on both sides of that equation. But the Bismarck, spent all these years being built and, a week and a half at sea. But what's amazing about the story written by the guy who wrote the book I'm reading is that he got assigned to the ship when it was still being built. And so he was the assistant, like the adjutant to the captain of the ship, Lindemann. And then he was also, though, just told, familiarize yourself with the ship. So he learned to, every inch of the ship because he was there when it was being built. So he had a lot of insights in that as well. So it was interesting. Lucky 13 says it was sunk by biplanes. Well, biplanes led to its demise. A biplane dropping a torpedo, a swordfish biplane, dropped a torpedo that jammed the rudder on the Bismarck. So all it could do was big circles. And it was later sunk with a variety of other things, but largely it was just getting beaten up by a bunch of battleships. And then eventually it was scuttled. But it would have sunk either way. So Lucky 13 says people were shocked when it went down with all hands, referring to the Hood, I assume. There were 3 survivors, which is one of the craziest stories of the entire World War II. The Hood and the Bismarck are 2 huge ships that are shooting back and forth over distance 10, 12 miles apart. And one shell from the Bismarck is plunging, coming down, and hits the deck, goes through several levels, and explodes inside the magazine, which is where they keep all the explosives, and causes the ship to just go up almost instantly, split in half and down. 3 survivors on the entire ship. And I've seen in later years interviews with one of those survivors. And the guy, you could tell, was talking about it and was troubled all these years later because on the one hand, he witnessed it. And then on the other hand, he survived it. And the crazy part about it is that if you survive something like that, on some level, you feel guilty. Like, why was I a survivor? And believe it or not, he got flack, excuse the mixed metaphor there, when he came back to England, because people would look at him kind of like, why did you survive and not people I know? That kind of thing. Crazy story. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting stories in there. And Betty Boop points out the PTSD to have seen that, survived that would have been something that would really follow you for years. Daniel Kester, survivor's guilt. Yes. Tiger Stripes let a vanity plate go with a car. Well, you got the vanity plate and you did it identify with the car, like a plate about the car. But that's crazy. Net 27, that's an awesome story. Are we talking about the Hood Bismarck? Lucky 13, the old movie The Hunt for the Bismarck is worth the watch. It's been a while since I've seen it. I also read the book The Last 9 Days of the Bismarck. And then, of course, I think, was it Johnny Horton? Johnny Horton? Had a song called Sink the Bismarck, back when guys would have hit records with songs about historical events. The Battle of New Orleans, that kind of thing. So the fuse man says 1 or 2 of them got taken back up to the surface when the Hood exploded and sent a huge air bubble up. Yeah, it's unclear how that happens because none of them were anticipating being in the water that quickly. So the boat splits in half, drags almost everyone down, but then there's an explosion, and it may have been a boiler exploding because these ships ran off of, I believe, turbines that were powered by boilers, but we're not really sure. Ram 50 V8, I know they found the Bismarck. Did they find the Hood? I'm not sure, but you're right. I know they found the Bismarck. I do not know about the Hood. Ringin' Constitutional says, hey, all, California checking in. Daniel Kester, yeah, the song Sink the Bismarck by Johnny Horton. Dave Beto is tuning in from White Rock, BC, Canada. Nice and sunny here. Very, very cool. There's a town called White Rock in Michigan, but it's tiny. There's nothing there. Julio Michelle, which book of yours are you the most proud of? That's a tough one. I like the book Death's Door about the Italian Hall disaster. I hate to say I'm proud of a book in that sense, but that's the book that I think means the most to me, if that makes any sense. It was the first book I got published that got a lot of attention, and I think it drew attention to a very important topic. So Rick B points out there's a White Rock in New Mexico. Yeah, there's a lot of those kind of place names named after something like that. Michigan's also got a Three Rivers and a Three Oaks. Gee, I wonder why. The Fuse Man says the HMS Hood was found in 2001. Okay. That sounds about right. I mean, they know roughly where it went down. And Ronald Gray says they brought up the bell, that they saved the bell. Okay. Mark Ewing checking in from Nashville. Hi, Steve. Hey, Mark. How you doing, man? And Herbert Richardson reminds us also that, yes, in fact, they did find the ship and recover the bell. I can tell you that the bell of a ship is often considered to be almost like symbolic of the spirit of the ship. And so, ships will often have a nickname. They'll often have an insignia. They'll often have a flag. But the bell, I know, for instance, the bell for the Edmund Fitzgerald is also recovered and is in a museum right now. So they do that. JP says, Steve, I noticed you have Tim Hortons in Michigan. Do you ever go? I'm not a coffee drinker. I don't drink a lot of coffee. I used to stop at Tim Hortons and get bagels. I'm not a coffee drinker. I do know that Tim Hortons in Canada, though, is like a religious experience. I understand that. So, Tom, most common city names in the U.S., Franklin, Fairview, Clinton, Greenville, and Madison. I wouldn't be surprised. Springfield's also a common one. And it makes sense because as the country is expanding out of the colonies, a lot of towns are being named after people who were important either in the founding of the colonies or at that time. Clinton was I think a cabinet member back in the old days, because we got Clinton County in Michigan. I think we've got a town called Clinton. I know we got Clinton Township also. We've got a Greenville. I'm not sure if we have a Madison, Michigan or not. I know we've got a Fairview. And I know we also have Franklin. I got friends who live in Franklin. So J. Paul points out there's a White Rock in my neighbor's backyard. He keeps a spare key in it. Duncan Campbell says the wreck to the Hood is in the Denmark Strait between Greenland and Iceland. And it depends on who you talk to, but they actually refer to it as the Battle of the Denmark Strait. Because the Prince of Wales and the Hood were coming this way, and the Bismarck and the Prince Eugen were coming the other way, and were shooting back and forth. So, little known fact is how much damage was done to the Bismarck during that battle. The Hood sank, but the Bismarck got damaged, and the damage was actually some fairly severe damage. So, James Castro, good evening, watching from the Philippines. Thanks for checking in. I appreciate that. Mark says, hey, it's weird I say hi from Nashville, but I live in Franklin, Tennessee. Well, hey, thanks for that. That's cool. It's kind of funny because people ask me where I'm from. I say Detroit, unless I'm in Michigan, in which case I say, well, my office is in Southfield, right? But it's like I know that years ago I worked in radio in Flint, Michigan. And I remember talking to one of the programmers about how we talked about ourselves and so on. And he goes, people who live in suburbs of Flint still consider themselves to be in Flint or the region or the community of Flint. So when you say, hey, how's everyone in Flint doing? Although you'd never say that on the radio, you're not insulting the people of Swartz Creek. Trust me. So G Vote, hello from Albuquerque. Love the videos. Well, thank you for checking in. I appreciate that. Tiger Stripes says, what do you drink? Hot tea? I don't drink anything hot. I try not to. I drink Diet Coke, and if I'm in a restaurant, I often drink iced tea, but don't really have. But I generally don't drink coffee or tea. Dave G1H says in 2012, the British government gave permission for Mearns to return to the site of the Hood's final resting place to retrieve one of her two ship's bells, which were lying in a small open debris field. Okay, that's good. That's good. Michael Krause, every suburb of Boston. I'm from Boston. It's just easier to say. And with the names of some of those suburbs, literally, it's easier to say. Half of those names, Worcester. Yes, it's not spelled Worcester, is it? Tigerman 99515 says you and Jay Leno, Steve. I'm not sure what the first half of that question is, unless you're commenting on the fact that Jay Leno is also from Massachusetts, but I'm not from Massachusetts. Not sure I understand that. Cyberdoc, as a broadcaster, do you end up talking less when not at work? Do you speak to friends in a radio voice? That's a good question, which has come up here in several different iterations. But generally speaking, radio broadcasters should not speak in a radio voice. They should simply speak in their normal voice, okay? So in other words, when I'm talking on the radio, I don't say, hey, this is Steve Leto. I actually go, hey, it's Steve Leto. And I speak in my normal voice. And so when you hear people with a good radio voice, like, Gary Owens, remember? Voiceover guy, but he worked on TV also. He had just one of those voices that James Earl Jones. This is CNN. He talks like that all the time. That's his voice. So you don't need a good voice to be on the radio. You need something to talk about. So Paul Harvey. Yeah, he had a good voice. Hang on a second. I'm having a chat right here on my phone beneath the chat right there. Betty Bibb, what you drinking today? I had so much confusion going on trying to get this show started. I don't have anything to drink. I'm gonna run dry. I'm gonna get parched, as they say. Ram 50 V8 says my connection reset so now I am watching it double speed catching up. Here's the thing. At some point in time, will you run past us and see into the future? And if so, tell me what's happening. Boycott watch. Bad voice. Ugly face. 20 years on the radio. Yeah, that's the old joke. You got a face for radio, right? What's always great is when you see people who worked in radio, and you heard their voice for years but didn't see what they looked like. But the thing is, that's changed now, because nowadays with social media, you can see what anybody looks like. But I know there are people out there who, avoided being seen in public specifically for that reason. And people like to fill in their minds what somebody looks like if all they have is a voice to go off of. There was the Electrifying Mojo in Detroit. For those of you in Detroit from the 1980s, think of WJLB. The Electrifying Mojo is an overnight guy. His real name was Charles Johnson, but the Electrifying Mojo was one of the greatest people who was ever on the radio, ever. And I just said ever twice on purpose, and that makes it 3. And the Electrifying Mojo did an overnight show from like 10 till 2 or 10 till 3. And he played anything. They gave him free reign to play whatever he wanted. He had no format. He would occasionally play songs you never heard before. He'd occasionally play songs that the station didn't play. He'd play all kinds of great, but he'd also talk. And he had a really interesting personality. He was very, very out there. I don't mean crazy, but I mean just different. And he would never let anybody. He would not do interviews. He wouldn't let anybody know what he looked like. And it was like it almost became a joke. And what's funny is he switched stations and went from WJLB to 96.3. At the time it was WHYT. And I was driving around one night, and I actually heard him come on the radio, and he was, "Hey, everybody, It's Electrifying Mojo. I just want to let you know. He goes, this is my last night on WJLB. And he didn't say where he was going. Not sure says loved listening to all the Mojo master mixes in bed as a teen. Oh, the guy would get the music going and it wouldn't stop for an hour. It was crazy. And I thought he was leaving Detroit. And he actually said, he goes, I'm going to be downstairs at the doors of the Penobscot building, which is where the station was located. He goes, I'm going to be downstairs in front of the Penobscot building for the next hour or two, just shaking hands and thanking people for listening to me. And I thought he was leaving. I drove downtown Detroit at like 1 o'clock in the morning to shake hands with Charles Johnson, AKA the Electrifying Mojo. And at that time, I'd been in radio a couple of years, but not much. And I walked over, and there's a couple other people milling around, but it's 1 o'clock in the morning, downtown Detroit, literally a couple blocks from, Jefferson and Woodward and all that. And I walked over and I said, hello, sir, I want to thank you for all the work you do. And he goes, oh, thank you. And he laughed. And I go, I'm not only one of your biggest fans, I go, but I'm also a disc jockey. I go, but I don't get to play the cool music you do. And he laughed. He was very, very nice about it. But he was a really cool guy. But it's funny because he there was nothing unusual looking about him. And in fact, if you go on the internet now, you can find pictures of him. But it was just, he turned it into a mystique because the radio station actually did a promo at one point in time where they showed photographs on billboards of all their employees. And for the Electrifying Mojo, they would put up something like a spaceship or something. And it would not be him. So there you go. But for those of you in Detroit, you'll remember the Electrifying Mojo. Now, there's a guy in Detroit who goes in the mornings and uses the name Mojo in the morning, but that's obviously a very, very different guy. So, JP says Steve has a good story when the chat slows down, or occasionally somebody pokes me just right, and I remember a story. Oh boy. The Fuse Man. I have a face only a blind person could like. I've got a question, and I don't mean to offend anybody who's visually impaired. But I've seen in movies where somebody who's visually impaired says to somebody, can I touch your face to get a feel for what you look like? And I've always wondered, could you tell if somebody was good looking by feeling their face or not? Because I know I couldn't. But I've also heard that people who've got a visual impairment have, other senses that have been heightened. Maybe that's it. I don't know. I've always wondered, or is that something Hollywood made up? So, Jinzo Defiler says, we had a guy here in Dayton named Don Ledoux. He was on the local classic rock station for years, also at a Cajun restaurant. Was a really cool dude. Yeah, what's interesting, and I'm going to miss radio, because radio is going away as far as old school radio goes. But there was an interesting time. Oh, by the way, Sid Barrett's checking out. Thanks, Steve. Got to go. Hurricane cleanup with my chainsaw. I'll tell you right now, anybody who leaves my live chat to go play with a chainsaw, you go with my blessing. Playing with a chainsaw when you got stuff to dice up is more fun than anything I can talk about in here. There you go. So, but there was a time, and I can tell you the evolution. In Detroit, for instance, there's a radio station called WABX. It was 99.5. In fact, that's a bumper sticker from one of the later iterations of WABX. But ABX was playing album rock in the late 60s, early 70s. And there were guys who went to work at WABX who then later migrated to the bigger album rock stations like WRIF. And then when classic rock became a thing in the 1980s, drifted over to classic rock. And so there were guys who actually worked in 3 different formats that were actually the same format evolving over time with the listeners. So there were listeners who heard these songs first being played on the radio going, oh my gosh, they're playing that song on the radio. And then, of course, they would often follow the DJ to the next station where they're a little bit more commercial, but the station's bigger. It's a little more professional sounding. And then as album rock started drifting away from that and classic rock came in, they're like, oh, we can go here now. And these guys are saving it for us. And that's such an interesting idea that evolution happened in radio, doesn't happen in a lot of other media. I don't know if there's any newspaper stories or magazine stories that parallel that quite the same way. Jason Johnson, I got pulled into jury duty in Wayne during a pandemic this month. Wayne County, the city of Wayne, or what are we talking about? But that's crazy. Pete Girardini, the AOR stations, album-oriented rock. And so for those of us in the business, we had abbreviations. CHR, it's contemporary hit radio. That's the top 40 stuff, but a little bit more away from this pure top 40, because top 40 could be its own thing. MOR, middle of the road. Urban. AC, adult contemporary. Or country. There you go. So, Christopher Ritchie, does the area you live in have 911, or do you have to manually dial the emergency phone numbers? I'm assuming it's just 911, although I have not called it lately. Is not me, 07. I followed DJs on the radio mostly because I was driving through the new city and found them. That's always a freaky thing. In the old days, when you didn't know enough to be able to follow these, there was no social media. A disc jockey would just disappear. And then you're driving through another town and you're flipping around and all of a sudden you hear the voice and you're like, I know this person. And the funny thing is 9 times out of 10, they had a different name because they're using fake names anyways. So Ilya Alawa says it's also known as adult-oriented rock. I've never heard that in America. Here, AOR would be album-oriented rock. And adult rock would be AC, like adult contemporary. But, they've segmented it to the point now where everything's been diced and sliced. So, Net 27, what are turkey drops? Well, as God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly. But the interesting thing I've mentioned before about WKRP is the format of that radio station made no sense, because supposedly it's in a major city and they play different formats depending on who's the disc jockey, which makes no sense at all. So, Jinzo Defiler says a lot of radio I notice is going to the conservative talk format nowadays because it seems to make the most money, or an urban or country format depending on the area. Yeah, what's funny is you have to look at it backwards, because we always look at radio from the viewpoint of the listeners, because we're listeners. We listen to the radio. And in reality, you have to look at it from the viewpoint of the guy who owns the radio station, whether it's a corporation or a person or a business or whatever. And they go, what can we put on the radio in this market that we can sell to advertisers? That's what they want to do. So if you can deliver a very, very nicely defined category of listeners that advertisers want to buy, you will put that on the air. And so I know people who've experimented with really strange formats just because they could get a really, really interesting slice of demographics. And for years, for instance, in Detroit was WQRS, which is a classical music station. They played classical music, Beethoven, Mozart, Bach. And they had almost no listeners. They routinely scored below a 1% share in the audience, meaning that they were almost statistically insignificant. But that one share they pulled was rich people or businesses that were using that as background music that were for rich people. Banks, investment firms, stock brokerages, Cadillac dealers. And so if you turned on WQRS, they'd play a 90-minute Bach block at the end of which would be a block of commercials for Cadillac dealers and jewelry stores and fur stores and all the exotic stuff that they would never advertise for on the top 40 stations. And so that worked for them for many, many years. Now, they changed formats a while back and they're gone. But the same thing with like WJZZ, which was a jazz station, had very, very small numbers, but a very, very well-defined audience. So that's how that can often work out that way. Michael Krause, dentist offices. Yeah. Dave Beddoes, top of the hour station ID. You're viewing Steve Leita live from Michigan, USA. Thank you very much, sir. And yeah, this top of the station ID is one of those things for people who aren't in radio. You don't think about it, but the FCC used to require radio stations at the top of the hour to identify themselves by their call letters and their city of license. WJR, Detroit. WJLB, Detroit. Over the years, they've softened that a little bit, and they let you say a few other things, but you still have to include those elements. So you could say WJR AM Detroit if you wanted to, or you could say WJR in Detroit and get away with it. But for instance, WJR was so old school. They had a chime that would come on at the exact top of the hour and go ding. And then if there was a person talking, they would say WJR Detroit. But if you're ever listening to Detroit Tiger baseball, which for years was on WJR in Detroit, right in the middle of the broadcast, as they came across top of the hour, you hear ding. And then somewhere in there, because they were the ones who were providing the play-by-play guys, the play-by-play guys would go, oh, we have to stop for station ID now. They'd pause and they'd drop out the feed so that the stations that were picking it up downstream wouldn't hear the station ID. And then one of the guys in the booth would say, WJR Detroit. And I can tell you that I worked for radio stations that were carrying Tiger games, Lions games, also U of M or MSU games. And they would actually say, now for station ID. And I remember I was board hopping one day and I was at the wrong end of the building. And I actually heard them say, and now for station identification. And I looked at my watch and I think they were early. And I go running back there. This is running back there and didn't make it in time. And they didn't drop it out. So over our station, they go, WJR Detroit, which is not good. So, WJIB Boston rang a ship's bell, Wild Bill 57. Yeah, I always liked it when cool things like a station's got something like that and used it as their signature. And it's just, when I'm listening to WJR, not that often, but I do occasionally, and I hear the ding at the top of the hour, I still think, that's kind of cool. It's kind of cool. They still do that. Dixie Champagne, how are the Tigers doing? I never catch their scores and stats. I'm not following baseball right now, and I'm not sure who is. Jason Johnson, more cowbell. And Doug Jones. And by the way, I got cowbell right here. So I've got 2 cowbells, actually. And you can never have enough cowbell. Duncan Campbell points out, thank you very much. For those of you who don't know, cowbell is a skit from Saturday Night Live, but I think we've talked about this before, so we don't need to go there right now. Boycott Watch says the FCC does still require the station ID. It's 5 minutes before to after. So in other words, they're more lenient on the top. And I think they also will allow you to insert things between station ID and city of license. Originally, technically speaking, you were not supposed to do that. And I remember working at a radio station, CK105, where we actually said CK105 is WWCK FM AM Flint. And I remember at the time thinking like, wow, we're really getting out there. Now, I think legally we were allowed to do that, but it had been relaxed from when I went to broadcast school back in 1981. So Pete Giardini says cowbell for cycling races. They also bring them to marathons. A lot of people in the stands at a marathon will have a cowbell, which I appreciate. And by the way, the Detroit Free Press Marathon has been canceled. It has been canceled. So unfortunately, I train every year for a marathon, just the one. It's out this year. So right now I'm training for next year's marathon. I should be okay by then. Plenty of time. Doug Jones points out that Pretty Fly for a white guy has cowbell. Yeah, cowbell is one of the underrated instruments of modern music. Jason Johnson, FM, AM, both on top of the world you were. Well, interestingly enough, the AM station simply simulcast the FM. And the FM, of course, was 105, CK 105.5. The AM was AM 1570. And I don't think anybody listened to it. I don't know why anybody would, unless somebody actually had an AM receiver, but no FM receiver. Like, who would do that? And I think the AM even dropped the signal power at night so that they went to 500 watts or 250 watts or something. So when I was on the air at midnight at CK 105, weren't nobody listening on the AM. I'd be shocked. I'd be shocked. I remember always thinking to myself, like, I should ask, hey, is anybody listening on the AM? Give me a call. But if no one ever called, I wouldn't know why. Oh, Daniel Kester says everyone should send Steve some jelly beans for the marathon. Well, no, jelly beans are only good at the 20-mile mark of a marathon. And for those of you who don't know, I've mentioned before, I've run the Free Press Marathon, I think 13 times now. This year would have been the 14th. And there's a guy in Indian Village, someplace around mile 17 or 18, who stands in front of his house and hands out little Dixie cups with jelly beans in them. And you might not think that a small gesture like that matters. I mean, there's somebody a block back handing out beer. There's somebody a block over handing out, other candy. But this guy has jelly beans. It's all he has is jelly beans. And I remember the first year I thought, I'll grab some. I grabbed some and they hit the spot like you wouldn't believe. Your body's doing some really weird stuff after you've run for 2 or 3 hours like I had at that time. And I remember the next year, and one of those memories where you have it tied to a place, I spotted the guy. I'm like, the jelly beans. And so I ran over to him and I said, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you. And he laughed. And every year I made a point of going over to him and saying hello, thanking him, shaking his hand, stopping, dude, you don't understand. And last year he wasn't there, but I heard he's okay, but I never quite followed up on that, but we'll do that one of these days. The SNL bit is Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult, referring to the cowbell. Yeah, Daniel Kester says you'd have to promise not to use them until the 17th mile, but the problem is that at the 17th mile, this guy will have them. And I'm not carrying jelly beans for 17 miles. I don't carry anything extra. I don't have to. Avoid the licorice ones. If Fusman points out, yeah, no one likes the black jelly beans that much. But you know something? When you're at a race like that, you simply want to get sugar or energy or something into your body. Your body can burn anything at that point. Anything. So you don't need to worry about it. Betty Boop, did you smack your reporters on the bottom when you passed by? No. I know enough not to do that. Boggy, yes, Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult. So Daniel Kester says Canadian Robot Lady needs to do another in-face interview. Yeah, we'll get that worked out. Yeah, Dave Beddoes points out the SNL Cowbell skit featured Christopher Walken. He was the producer, the guy in charge of making the hits. And I want to let you guys know that I'm just like you guys. I put my pants on one leg at a time. The only difference is after I put my pants on, I make hits. The Fuse Man, what mile mark is good for deep fried pork rinds? That'd be mile 27. Jason Johnson, Don't Fear the Counselor. Steve Leto. Cyberdoc, Walken was one heck of a dancer. I don't think I've ever seen him dance, but he's got a great way of coming across as a scary looking guy. I'm not sure how scary looking he is in real life, but Tiger Man 99515. You'll be wearing gold-plated diapers. Yeah, he'd say stuff that made no sense. And the way he says the word cowbell. Yes. Ilya Alawa says, I'll make gold records, is the quote. Yes. So, yeah. Michael Kraus says, love BOC, a YouTube channel produced like a pro, broke down Don't Fear the Reaper. The recording is amazing. Yeah, there's a bunch of really, really good YouTube channels about guys who break down how songs are made, what the different tracks are, and it's interesting to hear that stuff later, because there comes to be a point where you've just heard music and you take it for granted. And you may have seen bands play live and you take it for granted. And, much more goes into it than you'd imagine. And especially nowadays. I know that you can listen to a song like Louie Louie by the Kingsmen, and it's so obviously done in one take. There's mistakes that they left in because they're like, close enough. And in later years, when people like, Pink Floyd, and Scholes from Boston, who turned production into like a combination of brain surgery and rocket science that it's unimaginable. But when you see what goes into it, when you hear it and someone explains it to you, it becomes fantastic. So, Rick Beato, Tom, thank you. That's the name I was trying to remember. Rick Beato. Look up Rick Beato, Beato. Rick Beato will actually break a song down, whether it's a modern hit or a classic or anything. And he was a record producer. I think he still is, but he's a record producer. And he will sit there and go, this is what this is. This is what this is. Here's how they got this sound. Notice how these two sounds go together. Notice how these two rhythms do this. And I'm not a musician. I like music. And so when someone can explain it to me in a way that I understand it, I find it fascinating. Fascinating. Eddie Huff, Beach Boys stuff, scrutinized note by note. And the Beach Boys, again, Brian Wilson was brilliant, did a lot of their production work. Good Vibrations. His entire documentary is made about that or Pet Sounds. And the work they put into it, especially him, mind-blowing, way ahead of its time. And again, these guys are working with reel-to-reel tape. Nowadays, they can digitize this stuff, sample this stuff. I mean, it's crazy what they were doing back in the day. Boggy says, Don't Fear the Reaper was panned for being pro-suicide and surprised it was used in a skit. A lot of people criticize a lot of music not getting the point. JP says, Beato is a storyteller, but not much of a musician. I wouldn't know. All I know is he's a music producer and he explains the stuff pretty well. It makes sense to me. So, Net 57. What's the Beach Boys? The Beach Boys was a band that started in about 1961. Three Wilson brothers, a guy named Al Jardine and a guy named Mike Love was the lead singer, who had a bunch of hits and sold hundreds of millions of records. And their golden era was from about 1964 through about 1968 or 9. And then they spent decades touring on that, and their songs became the soundtrack of American summer. And I'm talking about just the summer in America, not a movie or anything like that. They were, some people refer to it as surf music. A lot of it was written about cars and surfing and the ocean and girls and beaches. But yeah, very, very interesting. But underneath it all was Brian Wilson, who was the wrote much of the music, produced much of it, and he actually stopped touring quite early on, although he returned later and now he does solo stuff. But he was really probably the musical genius that was behind the bulk of their success. Ilya Alawa says, I love Pet Sounds. Pet Sounds is a wonderful album, way ahead of its time. Pet Sounds is often compared to or put in the same class as Sgt. Pepper. It's a concept album. The album covers a whole bunch of themes that are interrelated. God Only Knows is on there. Wouldn't It Be Nice is on there, and several others. So, Net 27 says, that would explain why I didn't know them. I was born in 1992. I thought you were joking. They had a couple big hits you've heard a million times. I Get Around was their first big number one, I believe, 1964. Good Vibrations came out later, was also a gigantic hit, late 66, early 67. And then some of their stuff's been revived and actually does stand up pretty well. Like I said, God Only Knows has been covered a whole bunch of times recently by other people. So Cyberdoc says, beaches, cars, and women, what else is there in life? Some people would point out they were singing about the good stuff. Fred Stewart says, never liked the Beach Boys, too twangy. Well, a lot of the early stuff was kind of twangy. And you got to remember, these guys, the Beach Boys and the Beatles, in fact, recorded at a time where it was not uncommon to put out 3-4 albums a year. Literally, just crank out an album. And these guys are cranking out albums at like 5 or 6 times the rate that a band will put out an album nowadays. So Steve Brannon, did you ever hear the band The Hooters? Of course. And We Danced. Is that the song? They were one of those FM rock bands that had a few hits and they kind of fell off and just blended into the background. Help Me Rhonda. Rick B points out that is a great song also. Barbara Ann by JP pointing out Barbara Ann. Barbara Ann is off the album Beach Boys Party. And it's supposed to sound kind of live, but it's them goofing around in a studio. And I believe Jan and Dean were in the room and may have been singing parts of it. There's some debate about that in later years. So Jinzo DeFowler says, I'm a huge Beatles fan, but not a big Beach Boys fan, but I recognize their impact. And that's a common thing. A lot of people actually compare the two. They were contemporaries. And I think they even respected each other quite a bit because they were both on the charts at the same time, making slightly different kinds of music. But you know, that's the thing. When you see the number of songs these guys, whether it's Beach Boys or the Beatles, put out and the impact they had, even if you don't like any of their music, you still got to look at it and go, oh, they accomplished something. So the discerning hiker, imagine if Hendrix was still alive, what great music we would have now. Yeah, Hendrix is one of those guys where you look at the short career, figuratively or comparatively with other musicians, and the number of studio albums that he put out in his lifetime. And you realize that if he was that groundbreaking, that early in his career, where that trajectory would have taken him. And it's sad to think about. Road Wrench, do you think we are alone in the universe? Practically speaking, yes. Meaning that, is there life in the universe elsewhere? Probably. Will we ever be close enough to see it or communicate with it? Probably not. And I wouldn't be surprised if light years, hundreds of light years from here, there's life thinking about us the exact same way. The problem is they're so far away that we'll never be able to communicate with them. Don Jackson, Kokomo is a great song. Kokomo is written, of course, by John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas, and he actually lent it to the Beach Boys, and it became a very, very late hit for the Beach Boys. Jim Bergen, what was the strangest unexpected question on the bar exam you remember? You know, there was nothing that unexpected in the bar exam because if you study for it, you're pretty much going to anticipate most everything they can ask you. But I will tell you that I studied for the Michigan bar exam. I even took a bar review course. And I remember studying everything really, really well. And there's certain categories you know they're going to test on. There's other categories they can test on, but don't have to. So I didn't study much on Michigan wills and estate planning, because it's like, I'm never going to do that. And there was a question on there about it. And I read the question and I thought, oh, I know the answer to this. And then below that it said, however, we're not looking for this answer. Give us another answer. I think I may have actually done the big goose egg and drawn a zero with a line through it and moved on. Oh, boy. Bender Fender says, when Hendrix played the Star Spangled Banner on his guitar, people were in an uproar as they thought it was disrespectful. Yeah, that's common. People also thought that Jose Feliciano butchered it at the 1968 World Series in Detroit. Most people don't like the jazzed up versions, whether it's by anybody else. But of course, in later years, people realize it's pure genius. So some people are reluctant to accept change, especially when it's being done by somebody with an electric guitar. So Tim Bradley tunes into Lato's Law Stream and he hears a classic rock discussion. Why not? We're all classic rockers on some level, aren't we? Ran 50V8 says a video about the Wrecking Crew, great history. Yeah, and that's the thing, the Wrecking Crew, and also the guys in there's a group of guys in Motown and a group of guys in California who did a lot of the studio work. And like as a Carol Kane, the bass player who played bass on almost every single Beach Boys album, in concert, one of the Beach Boys would play bass, but in the studio, they had a professional playing bass. And then of course they would learn to play it well enough on stage to pass, but the studio versions were always better. And so they had professionals in the studio doing the work, and many of them, they were paid for it, but they were you know, they were not compensated the same way a member of the band would be. Francis Eastwood says, without the Wrecking Crew, the Beach Boys would be zero, except for Brian Wilson, maybe. That might be a bit much, because the songwriting was still good enough. You know, those songs, you have to remember the first Beach Boys hit was sung by Jan and Dean. Just so happened they lent them a song that became a hit. Ilya Alawa says, I like the Star Spangled Banner by Marvin Gaye. I'm not sure I've heard it. I'll have to check that out. Keith E. says, Francis Scott Key was a one-hit wonder. And also, I don't think he wrote the music. I thought he just did the lyrics. The lyricist or the librettist. He did the libretto if it was an opera. Boycott Watch, have you seen the YouTube videos by bassist Leland Sklar? He played on almost everything. No, I have not. Now, there are some great videos. If you look up Tony Levin, and Tony Levin's a bass player who's played on a ton of stuff too. He played with King Crimson, and he tours with Peter Gabriel, among other things. I've seen him live a couple times, and absolutely amazing. So, yeah, Tigerman 99515 says the Beach Boys were about harmonies, and that's true. One of the things that the Beach Boys were known for was their vocals, and you can, you know, I've seen them live, and I know that they played their instruments competently. You would not go to a show and go, oh, this is a ripoff. These guys can't play. They could play. But when Brian Wilson went into the studio with sheet music and said, here's a song I want to record, these guys are going to sing it, he would just, you know, hand the sheet music to Carol Kane, and she'd knock the bass line on it in the first pass. And so if nothing else, they're saving money in the recording studio. So Carol K. Sorry, I said Kane, but K. Jeff Clayton. Yeah, Glenn Campbell played with the Beach Boys for a while also. He was one of the studio musicians doing guitar work for them in the studio back in the early 60s. And then later on, when they toured and they had a couple members come and go, a couple members passed away. Dennis Wilson drowned. Carl Wilson died of, I think, cancer. And they would pick somebody else up. And at one point in time, they picked up Glenn Campbell was playing with them again. So Tom points out that Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young had the best harmony. It's kind of funny. When I was a little kid, one of my older brothers had the CSNY Four-Way Street album. And I loved that album. And I remember for years, people mentioned Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and I go, and Young. And they go, what are you talking about? I go, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. The way I heard them first was Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. So, Road Wrench, do you follow anyone on YouTube? The only person that I watch regularly on YouTube that I can tell you about is Agad Mater, who's the chess guy. He's from, I think, Croatia. His real name is Antonio. I'm not sure what Agad Mater means, but Agadmator. And he has a funny accent. He speaks English very well. And he goes through chess games and just explains what's happening on the screen, move by move, through a chess game. And he's got hundreds of thousands, 500,000, I don't know, subscribers. And he just explains the stuff so well that I watch that. I routinely, when I break for lunch at my desk, I'll say, okay, time to watch a chess video, and I watch a chess video from Agad Mater. So Jason Johnson said, hey, my people are cool chatters, not being triggered at all. It's been pretty untriggering today, so that's pretty good. Ilya Alawa says, I'm actually playing chess right now. Good for you, my friend. The end is near. Beware says, don't be scared. Give the fans what they want. Please give us an example of walk like an Egyptian. Well, it's funny you should mention that, because I'm now going to mention the Go-Go's, not the Bengals. Here's the final story I'm going to tell you, okay? There is a documentary right now on cable. I don't know if it's on Netflix or where it is. Look it up, about the Go-Go's, the band The Go-Go's. We got the beat. It's a documentary that's brilliant. It's a couple hours long, full-blown documentary. They interviewed the members of the band, everyone around them, and it tells a story about the Go-Go's, because they were the first band that was all female that wrote all their own music, played all their own instruments, sang all their own songs, and had a #1 album. They're the only band to do that in American music history. And there's a documentary that explains how they started, how they got to where they went, and why they broke up. And it's one of these utterly fascinating stories. And I was working in radio during the whole time. I played their music, and then they broke up. And then, of course, Belinda comes along, releases some singles. I played those too. I never knew the story. I'm not going to tell it to you. You got to watch the video. You got to watch it's a good documentary on the history of the Go-Go's. So I got to tell you that right now. Unfortunately, I have to run. I've got pressing appointments, as I like to say. But we've been up for an hour and 15. Normally we go a little bit longer, but unfortunately, we had the trouble at the beginning. Daniel Kester goes, Steve Martin had a song, What Is It? Steve Martin's hit record was King Tut. King Tut. Born in Arizona, moved to Babylonia. King Tut. So someone else pointed out, there you go. So I'll talk to you guys next week. I'll make sure the glitches are worked out. Until then, behave yourself. Bye-bye.